Hi, how are you doing? Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
I can hear
Is
you.
it a little echoey? Do you hear
It-
echo?
No, but it's kind of like sounds like a crappy microphone.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Let me sign up. Sorry, I'm on the other one, so let me just turn off the video on this. Is it better now? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second. Sorry about the audio. I turned it off for the to watch the presentation thing, and then now Zoom doesn't let me join my regular devices. So 1 second, okay? Okay, let me get my headphones set up. How is everybody doing today?
Good. How are
One of
you?
the things that we're gonna talk about is I'm not gonna hold class on I'm not gonna hold class on Wednesday because I just lost my grandmother. So I have to fly to Virginia.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no problem. It's okay. That's life, right? So I'm just gonna record a video if there's a lab. And then what we'll do is we are going to, if I get AWS set up, then I'll pursue the lab. If not, we'll do the lab next week, and you can work on just doing the homework. Okay. Okay, let me double check something real quick. All right. So right now, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about our assignments for this week. Let me copy all my stuff over. Okay. Thanks for waiting.
Oh, actually, Professor Nam, before we go into the class
Yep.
for fall, so we're going back to school for fall in person?
Yes. Well, it looks like they're planning 80% capacity for the fall. I'm told to do the schedule with 80% of the classes on campus. And we also need to have rollback plan in case the county have worsened or have more cases. But based on what the president has announced, the president of our country, right? May is where everybody's supposed to get vaccinated. And it looks like I might be able to get vaccinated later this month. So because right now they're vaccinating the K through 12 educator and higher education people, only if they're in the older age bracket, they're able to get vaccinated. But we are told to schedule classes back on campus. However, we are looking to do some online classes, but only at about 20% of the capacity going to be online because they are going to be utilizing the facility because a lot of the fundings are going toward the campus. So we have to utilize it. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So another one. So to follow up. So if I cannot make the in person, is there a way you
So
can?
yes. So with the 80% capacity, it doesn't mean that we can fill the classes like how we used to fill the classes because there's still social distancing, assuming that not everybody is going to get vaccinated at once, you know. Based
Yeah.
on what we've seen historically in the last few months, even though they announced they have vaccination, they didn't have that for our county. Other people have received it, but Riverside County and Inland Empire has always been a little bit slow with vaccination. So 80% capacity means that in the case, if the class is supposed to fill at 40 people, right? That means that we can only have approximately 30 students that's going to be in class with 6 feet social distancing and barriers and all of these things that needs to be in place. That's the plan. Um, so that means that we are not going to be able to um, have it filled. So we have to stream along with, you know, teaching the class on the physical site for the students that can come. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so that's what I plan to do is I will teach my class with Zoom. And then they mentioned that they are going to get this owl camera thing that's going to help us. Like it's supposed to detect voice and motion as we move across the room, and it's supposed to help us. But we like to, I personally, I will stream um, or use Zoom and teach regular class at the same time so all students can participate. But just keep in mind that it's going to show up on the schedule as a physical class, you know, and now it's limited to the classes that have distance education records or not. Not all of the classes were filed with distance education records. For example, like math department, they only did like the emergency you know, submission for the record because they were planning to do most of their classes physically and you know they have to go through the process to do that. So most of their classes are DEX. And but for my classes, the CIS, 98% of those classes were filed for DE. We worked extra hard last year just to get all of those in. Um, but it's also depending on the faculty too. And from what I know in my department, you know, we plan to use both modality, but at the same time, you know, it has to be accommodated from the college side. So I hope, I hope that that's, you know, it's going to go smoothly, but it's always going to be a little bit of a challenge. You know, having online classes open up avenue for other students, like you can work and take online classes at the same time with the regular meet. You don't have to drive to the physical campus. But unfortunately, the agreement that we have with the state is that we have to utilize the facility when it comes into a safe place where we could use it. So um, that was what I'm told. And yeah, so we'll move on from here. And but summer is going to be mostly online like this. And then in the fall, you're going to have a lot of the classes that are going to be coming back. So for example, like the networking classes that require equipment, that will be helpful for us. But then some of the other classes, I totally think we can do a lot of the stuff online, but there are some stuff that we have to be there for. So, uh, you know, small number in my case. So,
Yeah.
okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I posted some of the internship from um, Palo Alto networks in a module in your class. And when I talked to the engineer, I did a presentation last Friday on the California Mayor's Cup Live After 5 thing. And I met him a few times. He mentioned to me that there are quite a few opportunity for the engineers. He mentioned that, you know, Ansible, if your students know Python, stuff like that. So I started going into their website and I looked up some of the internship opportunity. Even though it says it's Santa Clara, a lot of companies are doing remote work with the interns. But it is a good opportunity. I don't know if you know of Palo Alto. They are one of the largest in networking and security. They came up, in the last 10 years or so, and it's a good, reputable company to work for. And the engineer that I spoke to, he came from RCCD, and he worked his way up from the ladder. He used to work for Moreno Valley Unified School District as an IT intern, became technician, and then he later applied and transitioned to more on private sector versus working for public sector. So I like for you to check out those opportunity. I'll do whatever I can to plug you. So if you do apply, let me know. I will do my best to really plug you for the jobs and the opportunities that will come up, because you're my students and I want you to see you successful. So I want you to see the silver lining in this class, right? It's not to waste. This is one of those classes that if you have the skill set that you can gain from this class, and if you get good at it, you can go a long way. So I want you to see the big picture, and I know it's tough sometimes to get your lab to work in the last couple of weeks, and we have to overcome the challenges with the virtual environment, but at the same time, it encourage you to seek different solutions, and that's what we do in this field. So um, with that said, I'm going to go into screen share real quick, and then let me open up my file. Do you have any other questions for me? No questions, huh? Okay. So again, no meeting on Wednesday, okay? If I do release a lab by today or tomorrow, it's gonna be, I will record and I will go over the step by step. I'm waiting for AWS to get back to me so that way, I know some of you have struggled with the virtual machines, or you might not have enough uh, hardware for the virtual machine, but if they don't get back to me, then I'm just gonna wait to do the lab next time. But you might receive an invitation from them for AWS Educate. So make sure that you accept. And for Chris and Ray and Cynthia, I think you guys took my class before where we use AWS. We're gonna terminal into AWS, the server, the Red Hat server that they have, or the Ubuntu server, I'm sorry. And then we are gonna use Ansible with the Ubuntu server to automate like user accounts, setting up user accounts, user permissions. So that's really, so that way you see tangible things right away versus running a lot of the stuff for the network devices. I might look at some of the things that is set up, that's connected, and see if we can use Ansible for that. But I wrote the lab to have automation for user accounts. All right. So chapter 5 is about additional details about Ansible. And in this chapter, it goes in depth with how you can implement loops in your playbook, and use Ansible library to be able to, set up a lot of different areas for your network appliances. So the book really geared for, network administrator and how to manage it, but you can use it in so many different ways. You don't have to utilize it just for network area. Like I said, you can have it for the system administration area. You can have it for the security area as well. So Ansible conditionals to start is like how you would implement control statement in programming language like Python. In this case, we would be able to implement loops. And in Ansible, it would use keywords to be able to execute the task that you ask it to do. So now in a big portion of the beginning of the chapter, it talks about using the when clause. So in the when is the key word that you would use, and it's supported in all modules. So this is implemented for Ansible framework because it allows you to establish the conditional stage for your playbook. Okay. So what you can do is you can use it with the condition such as equal to, not equal to, right? So it's kind of like what we've seen, we would have if this is equal to a value, then, right, it would execute something else. So we would see some of this, and when you state when in the clause, what that will do is it's gonna connect the modules in the framework to be able to establish the condition. And so that way the playbook would be able to run and the task would be able to execute. So you have equal to, not equal to, greater than, or equal to, less than, and less than or equal to, and then it contains. So the example that's given to show you is on the first page of your notes. And in this, you notice in the purple, right, it shows you how the output with when for the condition. So in this right below the name, so the name is however you wanted to describe your playbook, right? You can name it however you want. You can, but the way that we should name our playbook is it should be detailed enough so that way we know what that playbook is doing or what that task is doing. So in the name here, we mentioned that we wanted to use the show or to show the output. So that's going to be show or sh in the iOS. And it in the condition that when it's going to see the iOS version 2, okay, then it's going to show it. So very similar to what you've seen with pexpect or the other library, it's going to utilize the module in the framework to look for, it's going to seek for the version 2 of the iOS and then we're gonna have an output. And when you see the curly brace like this, we established last week that basically that's gonna be a variable that we're gonna reference, right? To bring in order to show that. Okay, so that kind of give you a brief example on what we wanted. And when you use commands in your playbook for the task, basically it's going to execute that command for you, because what we're doing is we're interfacing with API, we're interfacing with the operating system for the appliances. So whatever command that you wanted to use, you can use it here. Now take it out of context into, like, let's say Linux server, right? And you need to create a playbook to automate user account creation, right? Let's say that you have to add 1,000 users into your server and be able to assign privileges for this group. So you would apply the appropriate command on how you would add user, right? And that would be like, in the Windows case, that will be how you would do net user add, right? And then for the Linux case, whatever command that you're trying to execute, you would list it under the command. So in the task, what it will do is it's gonna refer to the system command that you tell it to do, and then it's going to do it to that target machine. Okay. So let's answer the questions. So in the first question, it asks you describe the use of when clause in Ansible. So when clause is useful when you need to check the output of a variable or play an execution result and act accordingly. That means that it's gonna execute the command that you ask it to do under that specific condition. And in the case of the textbook, the author shows that he used it to check the output, and he would reference the variable that's being used from the module in Ansible Playbook. Okay. And then, so let's say that we wanted to use a when clause to check and see if there's if the Linux that we're running is a certain release. And you can do this for software, you can do it for operating system, right? Let's say that you are the system administrator and you wanted to check for the version of a certain application. So what we can state is we can say when colon and the Ansible OS family that comes from their module. Okay. So we can say Ansible OS family is Debian and Ansible LSB major release. So it's going to look for the release version, and the number is going to be greater and equal to 20. So as you can see, it's an argument, right, that is applied to that when statement. So in this case, again, we are using the when clause. And anytime that you have Ansible in the front like this, what it's going to do is it's going to reference the module. So OS family is, because the way that software is released for operating system, it's going to tell you, right, what operating system family it is and what release number it is. Okay. So in the case, if we wanted to check for our Windows as a target, then we would say Windows or Windows Server. And then, you might have to state, because Microsoft uses a little bit different things, but if you look closer in the system information, it actually tell you the release version of the Windows instead of the nickname like Windows 10. It's actually 10 point something something, right? So what you would have is you would have the family of the OS, which is Debian, and then the release number, which is the version number. Okay, any question with this? And you see a similar example in the book as well. So what we're doing is in the playbook, we talked about this last week, that we would use it a little bit different than how we would program it in Python, right? Because the modules are written in Python. However, in order to interface and use the framework, we would use statement that would be in, in the Jinja 2, or it's going to output in a certain format. So the format is slightly different compared to Python, but it's very close. Okay, so here is what you would also see as for how the task would be. Okay, so here in the text, the author shows that he would set it up to configure the iOS, and it shows there's a fail, it's unreachable. And the example that I pull is similar to this. So for number 2, you can reference page 3 on your notes. And in the example of the text, it shows you that you have the OS family, and we wanted to check for the release. So what it's going to do, it's going to look for the release number and the OS family. Okay. Now with the Ansible version 2.5 and later, what they did was they standardized some of the network fact modules. And before, you have to get the vendor to give you the network fact information. So that would be, it would specify the actual details for specific type of network appliances. So when we're working with Cisco, it's different than Arista, it's different than Juniper, etc. Okay, so what you see is, you see now that with the later version of the framework, what they did was they streamlined this a little bit, where it incorporates most of the major vendor network facts, like operating system versions, some of the general information about that particular iOS or the OS for that appliance. And you have to know that all of these appliances have processors, have RAM, and they have operating system. Um, Even though their job is just to route and switch and filter and block, but they all have those main computer components, right? And the way that we would manage them is we would use a terminal, which is a computer that's connected to them via cable, like what you've seen in GNS3, that would simulate is that you would connect to those systems and be able to use command line to interface with them. Now, Ansible is a framework that we can implement to automate that connection and configuration process for us. Okay, so you can set up 100 devices at once. You can have them show, if you're doing maintenance, right? You can look at their configurations through using Ansible. You can, automate the tasks that you need to do, so you don't have to drive to multiple sites or, connect to 100 different switches or routers or, appliances just to do the task. So it reduced the manpower and the effort that you need and simplify the process for us. So here, it mentioned that you can look at the fact information, right? So here it shows that you have 2 iOS hosts, and this information is located in host vars, and this is the default location for the module that we're pulling from that framework. Okay, so now if you look at below that, you notice that because we're using the module from Ansible, so all of these, right, we would have Ansible_host. That will be the IP address, right? Ansible user, that will be the account that's going to authenticating. Ansible SSH pass, that's going to be the passphrase for the SSH connection. So what they did was they established this, and it understands. So when you connect to that system and you execute your playbook, what happened is it's going to issue all of these field into the appliance. So it's going to log in, it's going to connect, it's going to access the command line, and it's using the iOS for you in the automation process, right? So this gives, and it's doing it for both version of the operating system, because some appliance, they come with version 1, but it's compatible with version 2 as well. So I just want you to know that. And the way that the administrator, they would work is they would use the version that's adaptable to the existing network environment, so they don't have to configure 2 different versions, but they're very close. Okay, so all of these versions now, the vendor, they would have the same elements, right? And Cisco, sometimes the commands are a little bit different. So what they did was they provided to the Ansible community that this is equivalent to this and also this. So it established the network facts already. so you don't have to go and gather all of that manually. Okay. So in this one, it has 3 tasks that it's going to execute. It's going to use the iOS facts module, that's one of the module that's in Ansible, and it's going to gather the device information. Then after it gathered that information, it's going to store and display the information for the devices. And then the third is that it's going to display all the facts collecting from the iOS the V1 host. So what it's going to do is, here is the iOS facts that's pulling from. And remember, we talked about when. So here is the condition: when the network OS is iOS, then next it's gonna gather that when the iOS exists. Then it's gonna display the fact information, and the message right here, MSG, think of that as print. Okay, so when you use MSG in your playbook, that allows you to print, and that's going to show the host name, and it's going to plug in the variable, okay, and then the net version. Okay, now you notice that here, usually for gather facts, it's true or false. This is a toggle, so when you're looking at the CLI or the interface, right, it's the choice between yes or no. Okay, so if you put false, then that's a no, because it's a bool type, right? If you put true, then it's a yes. So in some case, you might want to indicate true here, but in our case, for the example that's shown here, this is a false. And our targets are all hosts. So if you put local host, that would just be to the local system. But for our hosts, that will be all hosts, because if you have all the switches and the routers are using iOS and you wanted to manage them, then you can just put all hosts. Okay. All right. Any question? So the output of that, when after it ran, okay, so to run that playbook, you saw this in the lab last time. So you can have Ansible -playbook -I and then the host, and whatever you wanted to, whatever you name for your playbook, you just use that here. And then it's going to go through and it's going to execute the task. If it says okay, then that means that it already ran that for the target host. If it says fail, then that, you saw that from the earlier example, that means that it didn't do it. Okay, so it will give you the status of the playbook execution. All right. So the prefix that we would use to gather the information and store the result of network devices from the network fact modules in Ansible playbook is Ansible _net_. So Ansible net. And if you're uncertain, right, it's always good to go and to the Ansible documentation. They are very detailed in listing some of the information and the use of certain area for the Ansible. And when you look at, like, security engineer jobs, network engineer jobs, network architect jobs, security architect job, especially for somebody like Palo Alto Networks, Cisco Networks, stuff like that, you would see, right, that if they require Ansible, they want you to be well versed. So it's one of those library that's commonly used for network appliance, and even for the developer side of the house for them. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to try to, and we can look at the example that's shown in our notes, and we're going to write a playbook, and we're going to name it iOS info to gather the Cisco iOS version of all the network devices. So we wanted to check the version for all our connected devices. Okay. Now, keep in mind when you worked on the lab last week, if you didn't finish it, but when you write your playbook, indentation and spacing is of importance, because it's very similar to Python. Okay. So we have, you would start, I forgot to do the 3- at the beginning. We would start with the 3-, and then you can name your playbook anything you want, but we wanted to put in a good description. So for the name, I just put network device iOS information, or you can say gather iOS information. And the connection that we're going to do is to the network command line, the CLI, which is what all the appliances come with for the managed appliances like switch, router, firewall. And now, so from this line to this line, right, we wanted to indent, and you can tab it in, or you can simply add a few space in front of it. Now, if you use a text editor to write it, it would be able to help you with the tab and the color coding and the debug process. But if you just, use a simple text editor like I do instead of an IDE, then I just tab it in. So for hosts, we would refer to all hosts. Then under that, we would have task. And you can have more than one. So in this case, we're going to do 2 tasks. First, we're going to gather the facts from those hosts, which is the iOS facts. And then next, we are going to show, we're going to display. Okay, so the first task is to use the iOS facts module. And in this case, we saw this when we wrote earlier with our when statement. So you have a condition. When Ansible Network OS is equal to iOS, it's going to display. So then we're going to have display certain facts. Now think of debug as in you would handle exception there if you wanted to put in some debug information. So if you leave it blank, that's fine. And all of this is in one line because I indented in, so it's dropping it on the second line, but you would put it all on one line. So basically we're going to print host name is, and then we're going to take the information that's used that would be pulled from the module, and we're going to plug it in here. So we reference variable here. Think of this as like your parameter where you pass the variable. So running Ansible net version. I wanted to go through this part, so at least the mechanics of it, so that way you at least know how to write simple Ansible playbook. But if you wanted to get good at this, you have to practice. and you can use your virtual machine to do that. You can use cloud environment to do that, etc. Okay. Um, if you can get your hands on one of the old switch or router from Cisco, right? That's, I tell my student that study for CCNA, that's how they're going to get, unless you want to, or you can pay for viral. So I contacted Cisco, just side note, and I wanted to get a quote from them to get the institutional license for viral. Um, and let's see if they're going to give me a decent quote, and I'll see if I can find some grant money to pay for that for future use. So if I can get my hands on it, I'll let you know so you can use viral. Okay, any question with this?
I was just gonna comment. I was looking at the GNS3, like the troubleshooting area.
Mhm.
And it seems like the students that are in that class, some of their problems, they don't get fixed by the GNS3 community. So
Right.
yeah, so
It's limited, right? And you see this with open source products in that they don't have the allocated engineers and people to fix, troubleshoot some of the problem, where if you pay for the product, they would use the money and they would dedicate engineers and developers to really fix the problem, right? Um, yeah, I know that GNS3 is limited. I want to introduce that to you. But is it going to be an excellent test environment? Not necessarily. It's good learning tool. It's a good learning tool if you're trying to look at how the network would be and how it's connected. But in our case, when we start testing script, it's probably better to run it on virtual machines. And I know now that like AWS and Microsoft, they have a good environment where we can actually test some stuff. But I'll go back to practice lab and see if they can actually set up something for me. We'll see. All right. Any question with 4? Okay, so before we touch on the other type of appliance, let's kind of dive through and look at some of the example. So here, based on the example that we last talked about, to show, right, the facts. So what are the facts is going to be? It's the information about that particular or the group of appliances, right? So in this case, we have all hosts. So these are the appliances. Now, you notice that they have like different IP addresses here, right? And all of these are coming from possibly could be different subnet. And as long as you are able to connect them, and you have a controller system that's able to see all the subnet, then you would be able to control those systems. Meaning that what? When I connect this terminal to run my playbook, I need to make sure that it's at a higher level in the network hierarchy. That means I'm going to connect to a switch right before the uplink switch, right? Or the uplink switch area where I'm going to see all the subnetworks or all the appliances that are coming from different parts of my network. Now, if I wanted to manage in one segment of the network, then I would connect to the switch that is managing or handling the traffic for that particular subnet. So it is a very logical process in how you would be able to control your entire network or a subpart of your network. And that would be a physical connection that you need to establish to be able to control those areas. Okay. So even though we remote in and we terminal in into these systems, you have to think about the physical systems that are connected across your network. Okay, so here it shows you the example for the conditional for iOS and Arista. So in the text it mentioned that, now most network appliances have a very similar interface where you would have like login information, host name, interface, because these appliances are vendor specific. There's some stuff that's going to be unique to those appliances. And with that, we would have similar commands, right? They look similar, but not exactly the same. So compared to the iOS, you notice, right, we would have the commands area. And for the show interface, it's going to be pretty close, right? Instead of so you can type in show interface, and then whatever that system name is, it's gonna, or that interface name is, then it's gonna be able to show the interface. And in the appliance, you would have like Ethernet and an array of Ethernet. Like if I'm looking at a switch, if it has 48 ports, right? We touched on this before when we talk about GNS3, then you would have like, you know, all of these Ethernet ports from 0 to 47, right? And then it would have another port that will be dedicated to bridge over to another appliance, or like your wireless router at home, you have a bunch of Ethernet port in the front, and then one that's going to connect out. So we can have it connect out to an appliance, or in the case of a router, that will be one, the out connection and the in connection would be dedicated for fiber or something like that. So it has a different interface compared to Ethernet. Okay. So here I put the little arrow showing you that what we can look at is our appliances is disabled. So what if you wanted to look at like your disabled ports? And in security, this is an important area. Like you have to go through and disable the ports that you don't use, okay? Because somebody can walk by and plug a cable in and start connecting to your network, and you know, and just take down your network that way. So what we can look at is we can look at a way to automate that, to look at all the disabled ports on our target systems, or looking at all the enabled ports. So here it points to the interface that would have the status is going to be equal to disable. So earlier we talked about using EQ, right? Here is where you would see that being used. So what it's going to do is going to check for this condition, which is disable connection for that interface. Okay. So we are going to use that example, but here, this is the output. Now, Eric Cho mentioned that because the reason why it's outputting fail on this is because there's key authentication issues to that particular device. So sometimes you have to think about, right, the process in how you would connect to that device. So let's answer the next question. Write a task to be executed on Arista EOS for Ethernet connection 3. When that is disabled, we're going to use EOS command module, which is for Arista, to gather the interface state output and checks interface status using wait for and EQ keywords, right? So that's a condition that we're going to establish. So we can use that same example that we saw for number 5. And keep in mind that this is the task only. I'm not having a full playbook here. So your tasks, you would start with task colon, and then in that we only have one thing that we need to do. So we're going to have a dash name, and SH stands for show Ethernet 3, and it's going to format text for JSON. And instead of regular command like you've seen in Cisco iOS, for the Arista, it's EOS _ command. Sorry about the red wiggly line there. And then we are now from here to here, we're gonna tap in a little bit. Okay, so there's like a two, I indented it in by like 2 space. So you're gonna have commands. Then we're gonna do a show interface Ethernet 3. So whatever port that you're looking to use, right? Then you can look at, you can state that there, but make sure it matches the device information. Otherwise, it's gonna throw an error. And then for the provider, we're gonna plug in, we're gonna reference CLI variable. So instead of using when, we're gonna do a wait for. So that would establish the condition, right? Result, that's gonna be putting this into the array of the result, and that's the first element. Interfaces, Ethernet 3, interface status, equal disable. Okay. And this task will go into our playbook, right? So if we wanted to show that if it is disabled, then we can do something with that. Okay. Or in the case of monitoring, we just wanted to establish some kind of log showing that these are all the disabled ports. Okay, any question with number 5? Oh, I have 2 display here. Sorry for number 6. Okay. Okay. So the example that you can reference is on the previous page, which is page 5, right? This area up here. So we talked about using when, and we talked about using wait for, okay? And when can be used across all modules, pretty much in Ansible. Wait for is specific to EOS, which is to Arista. Okay, so when you work with Cisco appliance, it's safe to use when. If you work with Arista type of appliance, if it uses EOS, then you use wait for. Okay. If you still need this, let me know, or you can go back and also watch the video. All right, next we're going to talk about using loops. So we can have loops, which are the standard loops. We can have loop over files, sub elements, do until. Do until is kind of like do while. And so now the textbook shows a few example on loops. And
Professor, I got a quick question.
sure.
You know how in Python, false should be with a capital F and true with a capital T? How come here it's not?
Because this is not Python.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it uses Jinja 2, which is another form of, it's another language. to work. So because the modules are written in Python, so they use another language to utilize those module in their framework. Because earlier mentioned that we don't always have appliances that work with Python alone. So that's why they actually decided to make the framework to utilize another language that's very close to it. So
Okay.
yeah, so you're gonna see a lot of similarity, but yeah, it uses lowercase. There's stuff that's similar to Python, there's stuff that's not. So the structure is very close to Python. All right. So here what we see is we are going to use the echo, and echo is used for displaying text. Okay, echo command is the same in all operating systems pretty much. And so if you wanted to show text or add text to certain things, like I know in Windows, you can do echo and then make a file and put text in the file. In Linux systems, you can use echo to put in, like in this case, we're going to put in the item label, okay, for our routers. Okay, so let's say that you bought 5 new routers and you wanted to set them up to be router R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, etc. Right? So what you can do is you can use a loop to put in item text information. Now, in all appliances, you know that we no longer use Telnet to connect. We talked about that last. We use SSH. So before you connect to appliances and systems, make sure that you copy the SSH key, right? We saw this in the last lab where I show you there's a step that you have to copy the SSH ID key to a folder. Otherwise, it cannot reference it. Okay. And every time that you connect, you have to do this. Okay. Otherwise, it would not be able to authenticate you. So it's going to show fail, 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 fail 5 times. So make sure that we have the RSA pub that's going to publish that key for copy. Okay. So here, what we're going to do is we are going to establish the task. Our task name is just to loop through the items. And then the command, whatever command that you're using, right? Then you're going to put that here. And then we're going to reference item. And we would say with items, right? These are the elements in that list of items. So we would have R1, R2, R3, R4, whatever you wanted to name, to have it as item label, you would put that there, right? So the string is going to go here. Okay. So the output of this, see how it updates the label for each of the appliance. It's going to change it from localhost, and it's going to make it into R1, R2, R3, R4, R5. Okay. And like I said, loop can be used for a lot of different things, not just to set up routers and switches, right? We can loop and create user accounts. We can loop to create groups. We can loop to, and in our case, set up systems. Okay, so now let's do the next one that you see this example, and this is on page 6 of your notes. So the next one asks you, I had typed this wrong. Let me change the IP. Uh, 10.10.0.30. So we can use that example for reference. So we're going to make a playbook that display 4 items for our switches using echo command on target hosts 10.10.0.30. So our playbook is going to begin with 3 dashes. And then we can begin the next line with the dash and then space name. And you can say, you know, echo loop for S item or something like that. So for the name, we put in the description of our playbook, what we're trying to do. Then we're going to put in our target host. We will not need to gather the facts. And then after the name section, you would have the task. And in the task itself has a name. So in this task, we're simply going to loop through. And very much like Python, right? After the command, so we're going to use the command echo, and we're going to reference item. And with the items, we can change this to S1, S2, S3, S4, and S5.
Is this in YAML?
I'm sorry?
Is this playbook in YAML? YAML?
Yeah, YAML.
So
Well,
are
it out. So you create it in, yeah. So you have to save it as whatever playbook name.yml.
are the quotes around the host, are those
Single or
optional?
so this right here is it's gonna be for your IP address, because when it's gonna ask you which host it is in the interface, and you have to type it in. And when it registers, when you input it, it has to be it sees it as text. So you should put in the single or double quotation marks.
Because I was trying it with, I guess I didn't know that I had to have the quotes, and I kept on skipping no hosts matched.
Yeah, so you have to use the string, because it sees it as an input of text. Right? So because when you're trying to do this manually, if you're trying to connect to that host, you got to issue in the IP address, right? And when you input the IP address, that process is about inputting in text. It needs to convert that to a value eventually, right? So if you don't use a quote, it won't see it as an input. And then, yeah. And then the same thing with this, right? We're inputting in a string to represent, you know, S1, S2, S3, S4 as under the echo command. So we have to put, it has to see it also as a list of strings for that system. And for a server, why would this be useful? You might have a bunch of child domains that you're trying to create, you know, container in the server, right? There's a lot of use in this where we would be able to loop and set up different items, container, storage location, systems, etc. Yep. So your playbook, when you save this, you would save it as whatever playbook name is .yaml. YAML. And also notice that I indented after the task, okay? So that's your block. This is another block, okay? Any question?
So on last week,
Mhm.
if I wanted to do this with the Raspberry Pi, I would have to include the host name.
Yes. Unless you find the Pi IP, it should have an IP.
Oh,
Raspberry.
well, that's if I connect it to the Wi-Fi, right?
Yes. But in order to do this, you still have to connect it. It has to be part of their network. Otherwise, because if it's a target, right, unless you're doing it to itself, then it's just going to loop to itself, but you still have to, network. You have to have it NAT, because otherwise it would not be able to. So when you have it as a standalone, yes, you can do it as itself, because automatically it's going to use a PIPA address, which is a default address that's still going to be able to use the loopback. But if I'm on my system, like let's say virtual machine Ubuntu, and I'm connecting to the Raspberry Pi, yeah, the Raspberry Pi has to be connected to your wireless network in order to be a target.
Do I have to specify the device? Like, we had to specify Nexus 1 before, or
No. Yeah, so if you point to the IP address, it should be able to do it. So there's host name eventually converts to an IP, right? Because it's a way that we use the protocol in order to do that. We would change our name to our IP address. So if you put in a target IP, it's going to be able to do that for the target IP. But what you should think about when you think about the Raspberry Pi is the process of connecting to it. So yes, you still have to set up the SSH, key, just like what I said for the lab. And then, so make sure that that key is copied to the controller system. Otherwise, the controller system cannot communicate with it.
And then last week, I remember you had under the host ini file,
Mhm.
you had 127.0.0.1, and then underneath that, you listed the local host. Is that not redundant?
So no, it is redundant. You don't need to do that. You can, because I am specifying that it is itself. So you can just use 127.0.0.1 and be able to loop back to itself. But yeah, so when you specify the local host right beneath it, that would just to reaffirm that it is a local host and it is 127.0.0.1. But you can simply use an IP address or host name. So, all right. So we saw the example. We saw how we would be able to do the loop, right? And you simply use a list structure. And we would say with items. Okay. All right. Let's look at the next one. Now, one of the areas that you will come across in a network environment is virtual local area network. So on one physical switch, you can have and one connection, you can have virtual networks that are connecting, and they would do this for like voice systems or even computer connection. So why is VLAN useful? It's useful to segregate different part of the network. So let's say that I have a branch and branch 1, right, for a bank. And in that branch, I have managerial systems to really monitor the people, the employees that work in the branch. And then I have like loan officers and the different area. What I can do is on that switch, I can set it up where all of these group of system, the subgroup of the systems at that branch to be on virtual local area network. And so that way we don't have like somebody that would be able to access different areas of the network in that virtual environment. And this is a better way to really control system privileges outside of just the user accounts, the groups, etc. So we would set up a virtual local area network, and in that you would have to give it an ID. So let's say that I would have the manager at one group, which is 100. So the managerial systems there, and then I would have, the bankers on the other group, and so on, right? And we would do this for like wireless networks sometimes too, where you would have like different access point, and you can do it so that way it established like a virtual zone. So in the case where you have physicians at the hospital, and then you would have like the for visitors and patients at one section. So there's, in the logical concept, it still uses different IP addresses on the same exact device. So you don't have to buy 3 additional switches, right, or routers to establish that subnetwork. So we would have a network, we would have a subnetwork, and within it, we would have little sub virtual networks. So that way we can isolate some systems if we want to. We can have the system communicate as separate network if we want to. And it's for administration purposes. So in this example, it's showing you how the administrator would go through using a Nessus router to be able to establish that, to be able to establish the virtual LAN numbers, or append that number for the virtual LAN. Okay, so here it shows you the example, and the output you can see is that it's just going to update the ID for that virtual LAN. And why is this important? This ID is going to be unique to that virtual system, the virtual local area network. So if I need to troubleshoot, or I need to go in and check connectivity for the virtual local area network, the VLAN, I would be able to do that. But it's on one physical appliance. It's just established 3 virtual local area network on that for the routes. Okay, so, and in order for the other systems to be connected, yes, they have to be active. And so when you take Cisco classes, right, a big area of Cisco certification is on VLAN, because VLAN is super functional in our operation all the time. So instead of buying a bunch of appliances, we can set things up virtually for different reasons. Okay, so in the next one, we're going to reference that example, and we are going to use it for the Nessus. This one's a little longer. Okay, so we would start this playbook with the 3 dashes, and we're going to add the VLANs, and that's the UID, or the ID of the VLAN actually, to the NX. I should say that here because there's more to configuring the VLANs than just adding the ID. Add VLAN ID to NX9000. And the NX9000 is the host. That's our target. We don't need to gather the facts. And it is a local system. Then for our vars, so here's where we establish the variables. We're going to use command line interface, so CLI. And within command line interface, we would have these fields. So when you set up your variables, you would then have, right, what is interfacing and then what's inside that interface. So you have the host is going to be what it's going to pull from Ansible as host, the username, the password, because it's still going to have to authenticate to that. And then here is where you actually declare the list of your VLAN ID. And if you have more, right, if you have 400, 500, 600, or whatever number you use, and you specify that there. But this one is a little bit different than the last one in that the last one you're putting in the string. This one is actually a value. And this value is of importance. The ID is of importance to that VLAN because it also ties back to, we can use it to control priority of that virtual local area network. So many different areas. So this one, we would treat it like a list of values compared to the last one. We would treat it as a list of string because we simply give it a name.
How do you know which interface this is applied to?
They are all CLI.
I mean, like a fast Ethernet 00 or 01 or 02?
okay, so you have to look at the device information, right, in order to know what. So like ETH0 is specific to that type of device, right? And then sometimes we'll say Ethernet 0. So in such case, then it will be specific to that device, right? So in order to program this, you have to kind of know what it's looking for. And the way that you would do that is you would go to that appliance and do SH interface, and it's going to list all the interface for you.
Wait, so yeah, usually there's like 24 interfaces. How do you know which interface the VLAN numbers is being applied to?
In this particular case, it's only going to apply from the OS side. So we didn't actually specify the actual port yet. It's only going to be an ID. So in order to set up the VLANs, you have to give it an ID. And then after that, you have to go into each one and specify it. So if you wanted to do a loop, you can also have another task to actually add the port to each of these once they're established. So the second task would come with that, Michelle. You see what I mean? You would have like 0 to this one, 1 to this one, 2 to this. So you would loop through and you would give it 3 consecutive port for the VLAN that you assign.
No, I just recall in when I took Cisco, you have to configure an IP address that the VLAN is associated with. It's
Right.
like a sub interface.
Right. But you have to tie it to an interface first in order to give it an IP address. And in this task, we're not doing that, right? We are simply establish the identification stage, and then the next task that would be tying the port to each one of them and then assign IP, because there's 3 stages, or actually 5 stages in setting up the VLANs.
Okay, yeah, I guess I never learned how to associate a port.
Yeah, so right now in this step that we're doing, we didn't tie it to any ports yet, right? We just gave it a value, and then after that we can, so in order to complete this playbook should actually be a lot longer than just to be able to have a full VLAN. But good point. Okay, so I should say VLAN numbers. Okay, so now after you have declared your variables and your VLAN numbers, then your task, add numbers add VLAN numbers. And then we would do an EOS config. And we would have the line item provider with VLAN numbers. Now on this one, the Nessus OS is different than the iOS. This is a newer operating system, so it's able to use EOS config like the Arista. On the iOS, the other one that you saw, it's slightly a little bit different, that it's older, so it doesn't have the OS configuration like this one. So what we're doing here is we are connecting to the command line interface, and we are assigning each of the number to the virtual local area network. And then after that, once you have that number, like you heard what Michelle asked, you would then tie each of the virtual local area network to the actual port value. So that way it would see those as a virtual port, right? Like Ethernet 0/0, etc. And then after that, there's more, you can actually control permission with those. And then you can specify how many systems. So this is just the very tip of the iceberg for the virtual local area network. Okay. So the reference that we use here is CLI, right? And then we're going to use the VLAN number, and we declare that here. The transport, how it's going to communicate is going to be CLI. So once we declare that here, we can reference that here. We declare this here, we can reference that there.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're calling the interface the port?
Yes.
I thought you meant like the port number.
Oh, no. So for port is just a connection means. Okay. And then port number is what we are often referred to, like a value that's assigned to that connection mean. So in transport here, how it's able to communicate this information with the system, right, is we have declared as CLI and then the VLAN numbers. Any question? Okay, we're getting there, right? And you can use some of the textbook example that you would see. There's some here. So when Michelle asked earlier, right? So now this would be the next step, right? After we add the number, so if you wanted to do all at once, it would look something like this. Okay, these are considered attributes of those assigned value, because think of it like a container, right? Think of it like an object in a Python program. If this is an object, then within it, it's able to access all of these attributes, and that's what we're doing. So when you're setting it up in the playbook, you can, after you have identified these objects, what you can do is you can say, okay, each of the object, these are the attributes. Okay, so to make it a little bit more well-rounded, we would then write it would be something like this. And you would, yeah, tie it to an IP address. Okay. So in the first one, it's, you know, for the first floor, the second floor, the third floor. And it could be, you know, branches, it could be, you know, divisions, it could be a lot of different things. And in this case, the example shown here, it's an actual physical subnetwork, right? That's virtual. So now with in the case that we declare it like this, then we would have it using, because this is a nested, right? So you would have VLANs because you declared VLANs here, and within it, you would have the description and the value for your VLANs. So this is why we would say with dictionary, right? VLANs, because this is a dictionary now, not just a list. Okay. So when you're using attributes, and the benefit of doing this is you're able to set up the attributes or the detailed information for that virtual local area network at once. Okay, instead of doing it individually. So you can implement the dictionary with this. Any question? Okay. All right, moving on. We got like another. What, 30 minutes? Oh, I forgot to give you add in that line register output. It drops it on the next page there. Sorry about that. Okay, don't forget this line. That's gonna allow us to see, to have an output. Okay, so let's talk about template next, and then we have like a few more to do. So they're pretty simple. Let's look at templates. So here you would find the example for the VLANs. And then it shows you the output. And here it talks about appliances using. So after it's done in the last example we looked at, it's going to show your VLAN, right? This is the ID for that VLAN. And then the attribute is going to plug that in. Okay, so templates. Sorry about the typo there. I don't know, I get sleepy. And okay, so template is gonna be, we can use it as a base, and we can write different template file. It uses Ginger template language. So the best practice, if you read I put some link for the module and the language information, but it's best that you would have it in a directory, in a folder, and you would make the files in that folder. So organization is key with templates. And what we can do is we can use it so that way we can apply it to many different type or many different devices that has the same configuration or that requires the same field, so we don't have to redo the work. And that's the whole point in applying these libraries and the frameworks, right? We can copy the file to the device, we can reuse it, so that's why it's convenient. So in Linux, right, make folder called templates, change directory to that folder. Touch is to create the file called file1. So now let's say that if I wanted to automate and I wanted to copy all the files, right, from one area to the next area of my network, what I can do is I can have it set up where we can take the template from the source to the destination. And in this, what you can do is you can simply put in a path like what you see the author is showing, right? Or if it's to that local path that you're in that directory, then you can simply do file 1 and file 2. But it's safe to put in the path so that way it knows where to pull the template from and where is that copying to, okay? And we would simply do this just to save time, right? And the amount of work that we would do. So what happens is in this, it's gonna be able to copy the file, right? And then if we wanted to check, we can simply do a list file in that directory and it should be able to show file 1 and file 2. Okay, so to verify. Okay. Now, aside from the template information, the general information, when you implement control statement or conditional statement, you would have to use, because it's Jinja 2, you would have to use the percentage symbol, right? Percent sign. So you would have percent sign, and then you would do if. Anytime that you use any kind of control statement, you would have to use the percentage symbol for, especially when we work with template that is written with Jinja 2. Okay. Let's answer the next question. Okay. We would do a playbook that's going to copy template file from one to another. So, and we are doing it on the local system. So we would start our playbook with 3 dashes. And we can do like template copy or something for the name and your host. So this one is to the local host. So if you have a target host, this is where your host information would go. And then the task, for our task, we would do name. So indent in and then do dash name, colon, copy one file to another. Then we would tell it that it's a template. And we would go from file 1 to file 2. So here in the source, you have the option to specify the full path where that file is, right, in that system, and this where you wanted to put it. Okay, so that's how you're able to copy the template. Because what's the point of creating all of these files and not be able to reuse it or copy it, right, across our networks? Any question with number 8? Okay, so here it shows you on how you can use if and if for loop, okay? And very similar to what you've seen with Python, the only difference is that we would use the percentage symbol. So you would say for VLAN in, right? This is a membership operator. You remember that from Python? And, in item.value VLANs. And then we would use the reference for VLAN number and then N4. So the main difference too in the for loop is that you have to tell it to end the for, okay? And end the if. So whenever you use the control statement for your template, you should use the percentage symbol before the keyword for your control statement, like if, for, and at the end of your control statement, you would have an end if or an end for like this. Okay, and that's the format for Ginger 2. Okay. So here it shows you for this source file, right? And it copies it to the destination file. And the way that the example shows here is that it's going to be using it between we copy it from one Nessus device going into another Nessus device. And here we set up the variables for the Nessus devices, right? This is the OSV1. This is the OSV2. So after you establish the variables declaration, then you can go in and you can set up your task. Okay. And the task, when we do the template, it would be like this. So if it's coming from a template, you got to add in the template colon, and then where it's coming from, where it's going to, and how we're going to reference the dictionary that we previously declared here, right? And with the Nessus devices. And we saw how the loops are set up. Now, if you look at this example right here real quick, right? So earlier, Michelle asked about setting up the VLAN interface. You still have to put in the VLAN interface. Now, if you have a list of IP address established already, you can have it loop through and then implement the IP address for your device. And in this case, right, it's going to go to the declared VLAN interface IP address, and then it's going to plug that in for the IP address. And then for the interface, like Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1, Ethernet 2, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so you don't have to do it 8 times or 20 times or however many. Okay, so we can simply use a for loop or if statement. So this is useful, knowing how to make it easier for us. For the conditional here, we see an if statement, right? So if item, that's going to be enable, okay? And it's going to have the NetFlow feature allowed. Okay. So next we're going to talk about group and host variable. We briefly touched on this when we were looking at the lab last week. So we can have a group that's going to contain many different hosts, 10, 20, 100 more, right? Or we can have many groups. So what you can do is you can make a group variable that's going to be containing a list of your hosts, of your systems, okay, of your target system. So the example of a group would be Nessus devices, right? Or it could be Windows systems, or it could be, tablets, etc. Okay, so you would have a group, and that will be a list of your devices. And by default, the directory would be group vars using Ansible. So it's better that we create a directory called group vars, and then we use that directory. So in the case where we need to apply it, right, we would just simply go to a location or a container that would allow us to be able to find the details about our group variables. So by default, Ansible will look for group variables in the same directory as the playbook. They need to go together. This is why I told you last time that we need to make sure that we put it into that folder, otherwise it would not execute. Certain things won't execute, right? So we want to make sure that our playbook is in the same directory as your group variables. If your group variables is elsewhere, it's not going to be able to find it. It's gonna tell you that it cannot do that. It failed because it cannot find the group variables. So you can make a folder and you can put it in together with the playbook. And then, so in here, your group variables, okay? So here, this example, we have Nessus devices, and then we can specify, right? Each one, okay? Don't forget to specify each one. Now, if you don't use a name like this, you can use an IP address like 192.168.0.2, and then host name, username, password. You don't have to use, you know, a label like that. You can use an IP address and list all of your devices. Okay. So that is your group variables. And then your host variable. So for the local host, that is going to be to the local system. Now we can have a specific host. So you can declare a group of hosts under a group variable. Okay. But in the case where if we only have one, that will be your host variable. Okay. All right, let's answer the next question. By default, where does Ansible look for the group variables to apply to all variables of the group? That will be in the same directory as the playbook. And, you know, in the example that we would use in the book is we can have it, you should have it under a directory so that way it's together. So the important part that you need to know is that it's going to be in the same directory as your playbook. Okay. For the next question, it asks about Ansible Vault. So what's the whole point in specifying all of these details, username, password, you know, even keys, right? Key ID for authentication if we don't protect it. So the security side of this is going to be that you would have a thing called Ansible Vault. And its purpose is to encrypt variables and files so that way we can protect sensitive information that's specified in the playbook. Because think about an attacker coming in and find the control system in our network, right? That's basically open sesame because it has everything, all the details, all the content that's needed to be able to access individual or group of devices across our entire network. So we have to find ways to make sure that these are protected. So Ansible will allow us to encrypt and use the files in a protective manner. Okay. Okay. Oops. And you can find Ansible Vault on page 13. We're almost to the end now, so hang tight. So here it gives you the information about Ansible, and the link in the book, most of them are dated. Okay, but I had added in the updated link here for you so you can look at the Ansible guide information. So what you need to do for Ansible Vault to work accordingly is you can use Ansible Vault functions, and you can manually create encrypted file using the create command. Or you can, so there are specific command to the vault that allows you to access, make something, encrypt something, or edit, and so on. Okay. So let's say that if I wanted to make create a file manually, I can simply use the create option, right? Like what you see here. We would do cat, right? And cat allows us to concatenate, but you would, for Ansible Vault, in order to cat in, you have to do Ansible -vault create and then the file name. Okay, so here, let's look at this this question. Write the Ansible Vault command for each of the criteria. So first, A, if we wanted to make an encrypted file called sfile, then you do Ansible Vault create sfile.yml. YAML. So that's your configuration file, remember? Or I'm sorry, that would be your playbook information, remember? For your YAML. So if I wanted to create a file using Ansible Vault to make sure it's gonna be encrypting, then I would simply use create. If you need to view and edit, you can do Ansible Vault edit. So edit's gonna allow you to see it as well. And then for C, if you need to encrypt, right, the content of the folder, everything inside it. Okay. Then you can do Ansible Vault encrypt its content, and so the group variables and the host variable. So that's what we're doing, is we are encrypting the group variables and the host variables, because those have details about passwords, encryption keys, etc. Then next, if we wanted to run an encrypted playbook, it's important that you understand that when we run encrypted file, we have to make sure that it's decrypts, right? So, and in order to decrypt, you got to give it a passphrase or a password. So in this one, you have to do Ansible playbook, the playbook information or the name, and then you got to issue in the vault pass in order for it to run. Otherwise, it will fail. Okay. And this is a file. It's going to ask for vault pass, so it's going to refer to the key file in order to run that playbook. And then if you wanted to run Ansible encrypted playbook with password file, then you can simply use Ansible playbook, the playbook name, and then this is a dash. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not coming through like what I wanted. Vault password file. Okay. Any question with the commands? Okay, so now you are familiar with some of the common commands. Like I said, if you're not sure, you can go to Ansible Vault documentation and also give you a list of the commands and how it's used. So these are some of the basic things that you can do with the commands. Any question? We have like about 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up. But then next, so here you can find some details about this. I took this from the text and show you. So we have various example. Page 13 and 14 covers some of the commands that we touched on. Okay. Now, things that I want to point out about this. So chmod in Linux allows you to modify the permission for specific files. And when you're dealing with password files or files that need to be controlled with permission, and this is a little bit more on the security side, right? You have to understand how this would be able to control the permission with the value. Okay, so in the case where if you do chmod 400, that's going to give the read capability, which is the R. Okay, and the way that we break this down in permissions is that it's going to be first, it's going to look at the file type, then in the number right here, indicate whether it's read, write, and execute. So when it's a 4, that means that 4 right here, and the write and the execute is 0 and 0. So when you see 400 like this, it's going to mean that it's read, no write, no execute. Okay. And how do they come up with the 7? It's a total of read, write, and execute. So 4, 2, and 1 means a 7. So if I have 7, 7, 7, all of that is what? It's going to be it's full control for everything. Okay, so if you see 400, that's usually indicate that that's a read only. That's a Linux permission control for file. And then, so the owner permission goes first, and then the group permission is the second field, and then the user permission is the last field. So when you see 754 like this, that means it's the owner, the group value, and the user. Okay. I used to teach Linux security long ago. We have to go into the detail on how to set this up, but you might see that in some of your security classes as well, if you take those. Okay, let's talk about roles. So roles allow us to have hierarchy in your playbooks. Okay, and you can also use include, similar to C, right? C++. You can have include to include various configuration files and playbooks for your tasks. So I can have one playbook include another playbook. I can have one playbook include multiple different configuration files. So you simply use include statement. Now for the example that's shown here, right? In this one, we would have the host is your local host. We have a template. And then in this one, we simply just have we reference the key, the item key here. So you can have many different types of tasks and playbook. And in both of them, you notice that they include show output YML. So we can have it just with the include statement. You just do a dash, include colon, and then the file that you want. Okay, so you can have them, and so you can have multiple include one file, etc. You can have one that include multiple files. So this shows you how you can use include. With the Ansible role, we can have it where it branches off, but the way that they set this up is you would have it as spines, leaf, and core, right? In the case where you would, now think of it like almost like a tree structure, where you would have start with the main core of your system, and then you would branch out. Okay. And the easiest way to visualize it, I don't know if I put it, yes, it is. Okay, like this. Okay. So you would have the playbooks and then your host, and then under this, you also have the roles. The roles for, could be appliances, and then additional branches for all the other tasks. Because in some cases, we might not want everything from the main book. We might want additional, some of the subtasks to be executed. So this allows you to have tasks, files, templates, variables, all different things in hierarchical structure in a directory format. Okay. So let's answer the last few questions here. So roles let you automatically load related variable files, task handlers, and other Ansible artifacts based on the known file structure. Once you group your content in roles, you can easily reuse them and share them with other users, like other administrator, etc. I think that's it. Sorry. Okay, any questions? And you can find roles information on page 15. You can go further and look at the example, but I didn't dive too deep into the Ansible role. If you have the text, the author shows how you can make a custom module at the end. And then, so for us this week, if I get everything to set up, and if I do get everything to set up accordingly, I will set up a video for your lab, but I might not be able to do it before I take off. So hopefully tonight and tomorrow, if AWS get back to me. If not, we'll do the same lab next week. We'll push it back a little bit. So there's a homework assignment. Don't forget to work on that. There are some multiple choice, some answers, so you can refer to all your prior assignments and notes and be able to answer the question. You will see similar questions on next week quiz. So don't forget, Wednesday there is no live session with me. Okay, I will put out an announcement very soon about Wednesday. I didn't want to confuse people, but we'll meet back again next week on Monday. Okay.
Be safe on your trip, Professor.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thank you for that. Have a good one. Type in your name. Don't forget. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you. And Cynthia, no meeting on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, they are to send out the email makerspace, but in case they forget. Okay, we'll meet back the following week.
Okay. Sounds good. Have a safe trip. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Any question, Ms. Lane? We're okay.
Oh, well, no, I'm fine. I was just slow on
It's okay. Yeah,
yeah,
no problem. Yeah.
yeah, I know that I haven't been turning in my labs on
Okay.
time. It's just that other things have been happening, and
That's okay.
some of the problems with trying to actually get be able to actually implement the assignments, the GNS
Yeah.
software seems to not be
So I don't need you to simulate it. Just write the program for that particular, because I only have you write one program in that lab.
okay.
I think that was like lab 3, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So just write the program and then submit it, because yeah, I think everybody ran into GNS3 to really fully simulate the test of the script. But at least, you know, if you wanted to know about GNS3 and how to set it up, you would be able to. But yeah, that software is not, even if you have the virtual machine running accordingly, when you try to connect, it's not going to let you test the script fully because you know, there's issues with RAM and stuff like that. So I was not able to fully test my script either. But at least now you know how to use GNS3 on the positive side. Okay.
Well, for me at least, what the problem that I had was trying to import the appliance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it just didn't reckon. I got stuck on the step where the Quemu binary,
Uh-huh.
it seems to just not find it on my Windows machine, even though I've installed it. And
Oh, okay.
and I can't even like get to go search for it manually. It just doesn't allow me to do that.
Okay, so this is what, so first there are two files that you download with the GNS3 images. Okay, so when you go to find these images, like you know, in their marketplace, there are two files. One is the actual image file that will be the first file that you see. Let me see if I can show you. Let me go to, like, if you go to the marketplace, right? And then you would search for, let's say I wanted to go and search for NX OSV, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that I find this right here, okay? When you click download, okay, it's gonna come down as this, okay? It's gonna come down, oops, as one file. But there is a second file that you need, okay? And sometimes they provide it and sometimes they don't. And you have to find it. Because when you do GNS3, when you do, I think I have on this one. When you do an import of the appliance, it's gonna ask for the second file, otherwise it doesn't work. And that is usually, it's like a moo something, like it will say MO something something file. And sometimes you can download it directly in the marketplace, but for a lot of the Nessus device, right, you kind of have to look for, you know, different things. So for example, like this one, okay, here's what I'm talking about. So when you download, you're gonna download like the appliance itself, right?
Yeah.
And then you also need a startup configuration for it. So there are two files that go together always. You see that? You
Yes.
have an image file and then you have this. But if you downloaded it and it's not able to identify it, possibly that the file is corrupted, because there are a lot of floated corrupted files around. Or somehow that it's, you know, your GNS3 is not able to see it as a file. I had two files that it was like that when I was trying to set up the configuration. So the QCOW2 is what you need for it, and then the image itself is here. So there are two files that you need.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll try again later to see about try to download, I guess, the one with the two files, and then see if I can import it again.
Right. So when you, but I mean, you know, if you don't want to do that, then just write the program. I'm fine with that. So when you try to import appliance, you're gonna use the image first, right? And then when you set up, see how it says it's not going to be available. I need my virtual machine in order to do that.
Yeah.
Because if I don't have my virtual machine running, it's not going to be able to do that. So if you can't run your virtual machine, it's not going to be able to import the image. Second thing too, is when you configure the appliances. Let's see.
I think on the set the memory to at least 4 gigs.
Yeah, but even with the 3-4 gigs, sometimes that's still not enough for you to script. Like you will run the appliance okay, but then in order to run the script in its command line, you might run across issues where it's not going to be able to connect. But in any way, if you want to attempt it, you can. Michelle, she got all the way up to I had told her to not use a Nessus device, to use like an iOS V, and she couldn't telnet into it, connecting to it, so it was still having issues with connection. But with a little bit of debug or troubleshooting, I think that eventually you can. But yeah, so in any case, you need both of these files, okay, when you download. And then when you set it up, you would see it's gonna let you import one, and then the second one you're gonna have to you would click configure, and then you point to the direction of the second file. Otherwise it would not run the image.
Okay, so when I import the appliance, I try to import the image first, and then I import again to import the other file.
Right. Yes. The startup configuration, because without it, it will not work.
Okay.
Because the image is a virtual machine, and the startup configuration is what would allow the GNS VM to see the other virtual machine. You see
Okay.
what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a startup file that it needs. So you, at that point, what you're doing is you're nesting a virtual machine, which is the image, inside the GNS3, which is another virtual machine. So it's a 2-level virtual machine by the time that you run that image.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's a little bit complex, but if you can get it to work, let me know. I haven't had time to go through it and see how the script worked, but even when I ran Humu on it, it was a little laggy for me. So yeah, but don't worry about if you don't get it GNS3 to finish, just write the program and submit that. I'm fine with that. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for everything, and have a safe trip.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for your loss. It's kind of, it sucks, but it happens, sadly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.